The first sound I ever heard in my life was a beeping so loud I thought my ears were going to explode. For 17 years, I'd lived in a bubble of silence. But my mom worked super hard and finally, she was able to afford hearing implants for me. Honestly, though, the beeping wouldn't stop, and I thought if this was what the world of hearing was like, I'm not sure I would ever cope. I looked at my boyfriend, and he was making all these weird sounds. My boyfriend is still deaf. He'll be getting the implant soon, so I signed to him to stop crying. And that's when he laughed and signed that it was me who was crying like that. I'd waited for this moment for so long. But little did I know how many crazy things I'd now be able to hear, including some big secrets that would change my life forever. Things were about to get wild. Before I share everything that happened to me, click the like and subscribe button, and who knows, maybe your hearing will become as sharp as mine, and you'll find out some secrets of your own too. I soon stopped crying, and the next thing I noticed was how loud my heart was beating. I mean, I'd seen my heart beat in my chest before, but oh my gosh, it was thumping so loud. My boyfriend ran to find my mom and the doctor, and I just lay there, feeling like I'd landed on another planet. I opened my mouth as I was so curious to hear what my own voice sounded like, and that's when I realized something. I had no idea how to speak. I didn't understand where my mom was, so I opened my phone and started looking through old videos. There was one of me and my dad from the last time I saw him. So I clicked play. I'd obviously never heard his voice before, or anyone's voice for that matter. It was so overwhelming. I actually fainted. And the next moment, my mom and my boyfriend were crouched on the floor next to me. Then a few doctors ran into the room, and I felt like a tiny ant that was about to be squashed by giants. Why was everything so loud? I covered my ears and shut my eyes and curled up in a ball. One of the doctors helped me up onto the bed and signed to me that it would take time for me to get used to hearing sounds and voices, and that at first I might not understand what people were saying, that it may sound like gibberish. Well, no kidding. My brain was fried. I couldn't keep up with anything going on around me. When the doctor finally told me I could go home, I practically leaped out of the bed. On the way out, I went to use the bathroom first. Obviously, I'd never heard someone pee before, so I got the fright of my life. It was so loud, and suddenly I felt so embarrassed. Had my friends at school heard me pee before? I ran out of the toilet so fast and bumped right into a woman who was waiting to go in. She looked disgusted and started shouting, but I had no idea what she was saying. I just walked off. But I was not ready for how overwhelming the outside world was going to be. I just froze. Cars were beeping, sirens were blaring, birds were flying everywhere and were making noises. Every time one flew near me, I ducked. They sounded so angry. I must have looked like an insane person. Then I heard something that sounded like a gunshot, and I just bolted across the road without even looking. I had no idea cars beeped, and I noticed just in time before a car almost crashed into me. The guy driving wound the window down and started shouting at me, and that made me think, was everyone always this angry? I ran straight into the park that I used to come to with my dad, and two of my friends from school were there. I felt so self-conscious about my new implants, and I didn't want them to see me. I hadn't told anyone at school about it, so I quickly ducked behind a tree. From there, I could still read their lips, and I couldn't believe what they were saying. How my boyfriend was only with me because it was easier to be with someone like him. But as soon as he gets his implants, he could get any girl he wanted, and that he was way too good for me. These girls were my so-called friends. How could they talk behind my back like this? A second later, my mom and boyfriend appeared in the park, and my mom looked angry. She was calling my name, and then the most awkward thing ever happened. She spotted my so-called friends and ran over to them asking if they'd seen me. She even told them I'd just had my implants done. They both went bright red and shook their heads, and suddenly I felt like they didn't deserve to get away with this. I climbed out from behind the tree, not realizing there were twigs and leaves in my hair, and walked over to them, smirking. I could see them whispering to each other, "Do you think she heard us?" Then my mom just grabbed me and said I needed to stop acting like a child. I looked back at my old friends, and they were laughing. It sounded like the most evil sound ever, and I decided I'd never speak to them again. I had no idea what was coming, and that getting the implants would ruin my life and reveal all our family's dark and dirty secrets. On the way home, I thought I was going to have a panic attack. My mom put the radio on, and I just sat there. I couldn't believe my ears. I was finally hearing music for the first time, and all I could do was think of my dad. Every time he'd take me out in the car, he'd turn the radio on, and then his head would start bopping along, and he'd do all these hilarious dance moves. To a deaf person, he looked insane. But now that I could hear the music, all I wanted was to be in the car with him, dancing like a nutcase too. We finally got home, and I needed to lie down. I got out of the car, and then I spotted Sweetie Pie waiting for me at the window. She's been my dog since I was a kid, and she's the sweetest little thing, hence the name. As we walked up to the house, something wasn't right. I ran back towards the car, feeling scared, and my mom said it was just Sweetie Pie barking. Oh my gosh, it sounded like a monster, like even worse than crying. My mom opened the door, and Sweetie Pie came racing towards me, and I'm not joking, I freaked out. The first night at home was horrible. I looked forward to hearing for so long, but so far it had just been a disaster. I couldn't sleep because everything was so loud. And then late at night, I heard voices. They were coming from my mom's room, and I figured she was on the phone. I wanted to go tell her to be quiet, but when I tried to get into her room, her door was locked. I knocked, and suddenly I heard my mom say, "Shh." Then she poked her head out of the door and told me to go back to bed because she was on a work call. I didn't believe her for a second. Over the next few days, I felt more alone than ever before. My boyfriend came over to watch movies one night, and we always watched with the subtitles on. I know I should have kept the volume up to get used to hearing voices, but I couldn't stand it. It was giving me a migraine. Anyway, my mom came home in the middle of it and asked why I turned the sound off. Then she started shouting that she'd worked her butt off to afford these implants and that I was nothing but an ungrateful little girl. Then she stormed upstairs. I was so shocked. My mom was acting so different. And come to think of it, so was my boyfriend. He seemed quiet somehow, like something was wrong. He asked if we could talk, and I made a joke that only I could talk. After that, he got up and left, saying he was tired. I woke up the next day and decided I would pay my mom back. I didn't want to feel like she could use this against me, so I asked my boyfriend's sister if I could work in the diner with her. She said I could probably do some dishwashing, but she didn't want me serving customers in case I got overwhelmed. I mean, I couldn't argue with her there. At first, everything was going okay. I just had to collect the dirty dishes and wash them. It was simple, really. After a while, I needed to use the bathroom, so I headed out front to find the toilet. That's when I spotted him. It was my boyfriend. How sweet! He must have been waiting for me to finish my shift. I walked up to the glass and was about to surprise him, but realized he wouldn't hear me knock. Then a girl appeared and he gave her a big hug. Who was she? Suddenly they were walking off together. I quickly ran back to the kitchen to get my phone. Then I smelled burning. The next moment there was this insane beeping sound and people started running. I was running too because I had to catch up to my boyfriend. I looked around the kitchen, and it was up in flames, but I didn't care. My heart was up in flames too, and that was more important to me. I could hear my boyfriend's sister screaming my name, but I just kept running. I caught up to my boyfriend, but it was too late. He was kissing this girl. I started screaming. It was the first time I'd heard such a crazy sound coming out of my own mouth. People were looking at me in shock, but the only person I wanted to notice me was completely ignoring me. Of course, he couldn't hear me, but I thought at least the girl would. I noticed a woman running towards me asking if I was okay. but I just screamed at her and she quickly backed off. I was clearly scaring people. I tapped my boyfriend on the shoulder and he looked so shocked to see me. The girl he was with was so pretty and I could tell she was deaf too. She signed to him asking who this monster was, and I swear I almost lost it. My boyfriend started walking away, and I signed back to her saying the only monster around here was the guy she was kissing, who just so happened to be my boyfriend. She looked really upset, and I thought it served her right. What did she have that I didn't? I chased after my boyfriend, and he just said that I'd changed too much and felt like he couldn't relate to me anymore. He said he tried to tell me, but I hadn't given him a chance to explain, and that he'd met that girl online and thought it was better if he dated someone who was also deaf. I couldn't believe it! What had I gained from getting these implants? Nothing, except one disaster after another. The day just went even more downhill after that. I got fired on my first shift, and my boyfriend's sister was so mad at me because it made her look bad. Great, I'd upset everyone. I went home and buried my head under the pillow, trying to block out all the sounds. My life was over. I'd been dumped because I could hear. I mean, how ridiculous is that? I must have fallen asleep because I woke up later that afternoon to a car pulling up outside. I looked out my window and saw it was a man, but I'd never seen him before. He knocked on the door, but I didn't want to answer. I crept downstairs, and then I heard him speaking. He was on the phone, and he was speaking to my mom. I heard him saying he was the house and that he thought it was time he finally met me. What? Who was this man? I thought about opening the door, but by then he'd got back in his car and driven off. Finally, my mom came home and she could tell straight away that I'd seen the man. She told me she could explain and that he was just a friend. Then she said my dad had left so long ago and that surely it was okay for her to date again. Okay, so he wasn't just a friend then. Had they been creeping around behind my back? I felt sick thinking about it. All I wanted was to see my dad. I missed him so much. I didn't want some other guy moving into our house. My mom asked if I could just give him a chance, saying I would really like him. Yeah, right. But what choice did I have? So that night, he came over for dinner. He acted like he knew everything about me. It was so weird. And then, when my mom was getting dessert, he said I was a lucky girl to have gotten these implants. I didn't like this guy one bit. My mom came back in and kept telling me to try practicing my speech, but I refused. At least if I used sign language, her boyfriend wouldn't know what I was saying. I signed to my mom that he was a loser. And then she screamed at me to go to my room. I couldn't wait to get out of there. As soon as I did, her boyfriend asked my mom if they could finally kiss now. And my mom told him to stop because now I could hear them. Ew! I sat on the stairs and wanted to text someone, but I realized I had no one. No one cared about me. I was about to go upstairs when I heard my mom's boyfriend start talking. I could see him through the crack in the door. What he said changed everything. I crept closer to the door so I could see and hear properly. He sounded annoyed and said, "Come on, you have to tell her we've been together for years. You can't hide this from her. And does she seriously believe you paid for her implants? Just tell her it was her dad. Maybe she could even go stay with him for a bit and we could get some alone time." I was stunned. My dad had paid for them, but my dad didn't even speak to me. He left to go live with some woman he'd met, at least that's what my mom had told me. But now I wasn't so sure. I waited for my mom to reply, but she was just quiet. For a second I thought my implants had stopped working, but then I heard a banging on my door. I opened the door and saw her boyfriend standing there, and then he said, "Nova, you have to know the truth. Me and your mom have been together for years. Your dad left when he found out about us, and he's been so desperate to get back into your life that he paid for your implants. There, that's the truth. Now excuse me, I need a smoke." I wanted this man to go away. Who did he think he was? But more than that, what was my mom playing at? She lied to me about everything. Here I was thinking she'd worked so hard to get me implants. But the whole time she'd been out on dates with her boyfriend, and it was my dad who'd been working hard. My mom told her boyfriend to go home, shouting that he'd ruined everything. Then she tried to apologize, but I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to hear anything. All that had happened to me since getting these implants was that my life had been turned upside down. Sure, I could hear music and the sound of rain and Sweetie Pie's bark, but now I'd heard my friends talking about me behind my back. I'd lost my boyfriend, and now, worst of all, my mom was a liar and my dad was actually the good guy. All these years, I'd been made to believe that my dad had run off with another woman when it had actually been my mom. I told my mom to give me my dad's number. All I wanted was to hear his voice. She'd done enough damage so she couldn't fight with me on this. She gave me his number and I called him. I was completely shaking. When he answered, I just started crying. And then he was crying and saying, "Nova, is that you? Oh, Nova, I miss you so much." I tried to speak, but nothing came out. My dad just kept crying, saying, "My baby can hear." It is so good to have my dad back in my life. As for my mom, things are still a bit weird between us, but we'll figure it out. I guess I am glad I finally got to hear, otherwise I might never have found out any of these secrets. But seriously, the world is loud. It's gonna take time to get used to it all, and as for speaking, well, one word at a time for now.